ladies and gentlemen, touching on many of the issues that we are going to explore through our three panels today, which, as I say, first we're going to take a global outlook, look at the challenges around the world and how they're impacting on Europe and on business. Then we're going to look on our inside and what we are doing about competitiveness and how to bridge that gap from words to deeds. And then that overarching picture. How do we ensure that we really are big on the big things, and that enables us to be successful? Lots to discuss. Let me bring up our first panel, which is entitled Global Outlook, Key Global Challenges and Opportunities and How They Affect Business. And as I introduce you speakers, please do come and join me on the stage. I'm delighted to welcome, and she's just rushed in, so I hope you've had a moment to catch your breath, Anne Mettler, Head of European Political Strategy Centre. Anne, please do come and join me. Carolyn Fairbairn, Director General of the Confederation of British Industries. Come sit next to me, Anne. Confederation of British Industries, the CBI. Lots of talk already about Brexit this morning. Carolyn, I'm sure we will come back to that. Delighted to welcome back Ulrich Grillo, President of the Federation of German Industry, BDI, and Chairman of the Executive Board of Grillo-Werke. Please come next to Carolyn. There we go. Mark Hutchinson, CEO of GE Europe. A very warm welcome to you, Mark. Make yourself comfortable. Georg Kapsch, President of the Federation of Austrian Industries, IV, and CEO of Kapsch. And Juan Rosell, President of the Confederation of Employers and Industries of Spain, CEOE, although I suspect the acronym is pronounced slightly differently if one is using the original Spanish, but I won't go there at this time of the morning, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, the format for these panels is very simple. They're not going to make any opening remarks. We're going to dive in. I have a few questions just to get us started, and then I will come out to all of you with the microphone for your questions and indeed, I hope, your comments. We want to capture a lot of the expertise in this room as we discuss these challenges in detail. So let us dive in, and Anne, perhaps I could come to you first. We've already heard we saw the video, and Emma was talking earlier about some of these challenges that we face in the outside world, some of the threats. I'm wondering how you see those challenges, and amid all this doom and gloom, Brussels is a pretty miserable place at the moment. Do you see opportunities as well as challenges? Thought from you, just to kick us off on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning. So I wasn't here earlier, so I don't know quite what was said, but I do appreciate an opportunity to speak about, what might be going the right way. And as you said, right now it's a very gloomy scenario. But I think it's, without meaning to sound blasé, I think it's worthwhile to remember that Europe is still the largest economy in the world. I just yesterday looked at the FDI figures, foreign direct investment. Both in 2014 and 2015, Europe was the largest recipient in the world of foreign direct investment. We have a consistently higher employment rates, and in female employment rates, we now have higher rates than in the United States. So my point is, I think, understandably, the mood is bad because we are confronted with so many crises at the same time. But I think from the point of view where I sit, it is important to understand that we need to really deliver on what are President Juncker's 10 priorities. So the Commission is very much in delivery mode, and you will have noticed that despite all the crisis, we have now brought underway Energy Union, the DSM, the Digital Single Market, and I think this is very important to understand that the show must go on, even though we are confronted with several crises at the same time.
And it's an interesting point there about a tendency, a loss of confidence in Europe, where we tend to always talk ourselves down rather than highlight what we're doing well. Perhaps, I don't know whether we can come back during the day to how we fix that. Carolyn, from your perspective, how do you see the balance of challenges, threats and opportunities? And if you could, let's bring it out into the open. It's already been mentioned by Emma, by Donald Tusk. 2 words on Brexit, if you would. Let's deal with it straight
2
away.
words, gosh.
Yes,
please.
yes. Remain and remain.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it is clearly a time of great uncertainty. You know, on the Richter scale of uncertainty, we're probably up at the 7 or 8. But businesses have always faced uncertainty. And you know, as I've gone around, I'm relatively new at the CBI, and so I've been out talking to British businesses constantly over the last 3 months. And what they've been saying to me is, you know, yes, there is uncertainty out there, but actually there's also some real resilience in the UK economy, and I see it across Europe as well. I think it's right that we sometimes talk ourselves down. So, you know, what are the strengths we have? We have a great track record in innovation, in science, in manufacturing. We have a great, well-educated labour force. We do a lot of things extremely well. And I think if I had to say what the real challenge is going forward, and I think President Tusk captured it well, it is this challenge of adapting now to extraordinary new challenges. And again, if I think about what I hear most going to talk to British companies, they're talking about the challenge of skill shortages. You know, actually, how do we find people with the skills for the future and make sure we're not training people for the jobs of the past? Digitization, this extraordinary challenge, you know, the fourth industrial revolution, which I think is absolutely real, that the extraordinary opportunities of robotics, of AI, how we make sure we harness those technologies and make them work for Europe. And I think that takes us back to these very, very important issues of labour market flexibility, of making sure that we are training the right people to do the right jobs. It actually takes us back to the right kind of infrastructure. We must have great digital infrastructure, the digital single market, a really important part of the plan and the opportunity. But I have to say, I remain very optimistic for Europe. I think that we have a lot of extraordinary strengths. I ask quite often the companies that I go and see with, particularly the multinationals, why are you in Europe, why are you in Britain? And they often come back with creativity and innovation. And if we can build on that and continue to be outstanding at that globally, then I think that there is a very bright future.
Thank you. And are you equally optimistic that we will remain and not leave?
Oh, I am touching all the wood I can find. I have to say, I think that the prosperity case for staying in Europe is beginning to come through much more strongly in the UK. It's a complex debate, and I think anybody who pretends this is very easy on one side or the other, if you're sitting in the UK right now, it isn't. There are complex issues around sovereignty, obviously the migration issues that have been mentioned already. But the prosperity case, what this means for jobs and growth, careers for our children, this is a debate where I think the business voice is absolutely vital. Businesses can make that case more strongly than anybody else. And actually, I have to say, I would just like to say, we at the CBI, the business community in the UK, hugely appreciate the support that we have had from business communities across Europe. I think we are increasingly speaking with a single voice, and I think that voice is increasingly being heard.
Thank you very much indeed. So Ulrich, in terms of the challenges that we face, and Emma enumerated them very clearly at the beginning, and where the focus needs to be. And interesting, that point about skills, the reform barometer that Business Europe has done, that you've all got on a key, and you've got a summary in your packs, highlights real concerns among many companies about skills and skills mismatches. But for you, the key challenges, the key threats, and do you see opportunities? Do you share this sense that there are good things about Europe to build on, or do you see the balance sheet as very negative at the moment?
So to be honest, the biggest challenge is the traffic in Brussels. Yeah?
I sympathize,
And
particularly here.
if we are successful to make it a little bit easier, to make it a little bit more fluently, that could be the challenge also for Europe. I think we must make Europe faster, we must make Europe more efficient, we must make it stronger. So one real challenge is, of course, that Europe so far doesn't work. These days doesn't work very good. Of course, in the refugee crisis, we have a tendency to nationalism, yeah, and that's not Europe. We have to live more in solidarity. We have to work together. We have to work closely. We can't let Greece suffering somewhere. We can't let other countries. We can't build borders. We must save what Emma said, of course. Schengen is one of the highest achievements of Europe. So that's the really challenge for Europe, and we need a strong Europe, a fast Europe. 90% of the economic growth will take place outside of Europe. So the part of Europe of the worldwide trade is going down and down. So we need to be stronger. And of course, thank you. I'm optimistic for your optimistic words. I think we need Brexit. We need not Brexit. We need Great Britain, and Great Britain needs us in Europe. So I think hopefully we are on the right track there. There are a lot of other challenges, the crisis, the wars, terrorism attacks. Everything brings uncertainty. Of course, we have global uncertainties in the economic development. Let's look to Asia, to China, to India, to South America. So a lot of uncertainties, and what businessmen, what businesswomen, what companies don't like is uncertainties. And that's, of course, a challenge. But on the other hand, I'm also always optimistic guy, and for me, always the glass is half full. So we have a lot of chances if we are successful to get Europe back on track, to make Europe stronger. If we are successful to introduce the energy union, the European digital market, all these things as advantages of Europe, then we will be successful in the future. If we are successful to negotiate TTIP successfully, because together we have almost 50% of the worldwide trade. So we have so much chances in our hands. So we must put them through.
Okay, thank you very much. Talk more about how to seize those chances later. But Mark, are you a glass half full or a glass half empty man at this stage?
I always take the positive view of life anyway. Actually, I work with GE. We're a European company as well.
I'm sure your mic is working at the moment.
Am I on?
It's not a GE technology.
If not, why don't you... Sorry, just momentarily while they fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it work? Does it work?
No, not
Okay,
at the moment.
good
No.
morning. So I work for GE, which is a European company as well, actually. So we have 100,000 people here. And we love Europe. We love Europe. And we just, talk about investment here. We just spent $11 million buying Alstom. And we get the question, it's kind of funny, you go around the countries and they ask, well, why do you like us? And because, the capability in Europe is fantastic, actually. And so the way we look at it, we do about $20 billion of revenue in Europe, but we do about $25 billion of revenue from Europe to the rest of the world. And so it's how you use that capability. So, and that's the reason we bought Alstom. It wasn't to do work necessarily in Europe. It was to do work outside. So exports are important. And as we look at Europe, you have to be flexible as a global company now. We're in 150 countries. We find work to do everywhere in the world. You have to have flexibility of your labor force, and that's where we have problems in Europe. And I think the lack of flexibility is a hindrance, because you do make decisions based on that, of where you're going to put your manufacturing sites, where you're going to put your capability. And it's tough. It's a tough place to be. So I think Europe we love. There's a lot of opportunity around the world for using the European capability, which we think is second to none. But the labor market is a tough place to be. And then I think as we think about opportunity, I agree with Caroline. This digital thing is massive. It is massive. It's, we talk about, I talked to Tom Friedman, actually. He's an author recently. We always talk about the cloud. And the cloud, it sounds fluffy. He says, no, this is a supernova. This is the most important thing to man since fire. And it's something which Europe can play a very, very critical role, actually. And just, what you can do, the Internet of Things, the 4.0, whatever you call it, it's productivity at the end of the day. How do you make assets more productive? And you have the brains here in Europe to really take a lead, actually. So we look at that. That's a huge opportunity. We've actually bet the company, 140-year-old company, we're betting on going digital. And Europe's going to play a big part for us.
Okay, thank you. And some very striking figures that Business Europe have produced in that area, estimating that the possible value to our economy, 1.25 trillion by 2025, but the potential loss, more than 10% of Europe's industrial base. So question for this panel and for later, why are we losing out in the digital race? Or, as many people fear we are, but we will come back on that, I hope, in the discussion. But in that global picture, Georg, Kapsch, for you, the key challenges, anything that you would particularly underline that's not been mentioned, where would you put the emphasis? And are you a glass half full or glass half empty man at this stage?
Well, I think there's hardly anything to add what President Marcegaglia has already said, but I think what we have to be aware of, that in the end it's all about employment, because employment in a region secures social stability, and social stability secures democracy. And I think that's what should be in our heart and in our mind all the time. And I think there is no doubt that this just can be realized having a unified and even more integrated European Union than it was in the past and than it is today. Because today we are facing disintegration. And that's really a pity and a huge threat. On the other hand, I think Europe very much underestimates the dynamics going on around us in the rest of the world. And I think it's not, size does not really matter. Whether we are the largest, the second largest, or the third largest economy in the world. I think it's more about dynamics of policies and dynamics of the industry and the entire economy than it's about size. And that's where we are really lacking. And we are implementing counterproductive measures, one after the other, for increasing value in Europe and increasing growth in Europe. And I think that's the basic problem. And we were created, the European Union was created as a model for peace, for liberalization and deregulation. And we were never, ever before that much regulated as we are today. And this is the real biggest threat, because freedom is the basis for growth. And that's what we have to realize. And in 2008, we were told that 20% will be the goal of the industry quota in Europe. And where are we now? We are even below 2008. So nothing works, and that's the problem.
Okay, lots to come back on there, and that dynamics. If we're underestimating it, you talked about the need to adapt. Why are we getting it wrong? But we'll come back. Juan, an opening thought from you in terms of the challenges and the opportunities and how you see the balance between those two things, please.
Well, we are facing numerous challenges affecting different areas, from the economic point of view, from the social point of view. From the economic, we have some problems, for us it's absolutely clear. Fiscal consolidation. Is possible to increase our expenses? No. From the high public debt level, we have to reduce. We have no option. And now we have a very low interest rate. Digital economy is a revolution, and it's our opportunity. And in this opportunity, we are arriving. Europe is arriving too late, and we have to invest a lot in the new digital economy. And from the social challenges, I think it's important. The population around the world, where they want to come to Europe. Why? Because they live and work better than in other places around the world. The gap between the wealth and the poverty, I think it is a problem forever. And we have to, from Europe, we have to evaluate and we have to see what we can do, but not alone Europe with the rest of the world. The social security. The social security is our difference with the rest of the world. Will be possible to maintain our social security and the number of the pensions that increasing each year? This is a very important question. Big challenge for Europe. I think it's very easy. More companies. We need more medium and large companies. We need companies paying reasonable taxes, and with these reasonable taxes, create a land of opportunities, but understanding that we are not alone in the world, in Europe, and we have to see what it happens around the world, because we need to compare and take decisions.
And that point about understanding that we're not alone, not underestimating the dynamics, why, if you think Europe has perhaps struggled to understand this new world picture and how things are changing and what that means for businesses, but also, as you pointed out, Georg, for policymakers, why are we struggling? Is it because we can't see a way of reconciling our values with that changed world? Or do you think we are adapting, just perhaps not fast enough? What's the problem here? Georg?
Well, first, I think it doesn't work. May I? Okay, thank you.
No, it's come on now. He just needs a second at the beginning to pick you up. That was a different problem. Yeah, you should be on. Try. Just talk. There we are.
When we are talking about European values, I question that we have a real European value, because there are different values in Europe. And the refugee crisis really shows it very clearly, that we have different values, and that solidarity is still not really established in Europe. On the other hand, I think we are much too much concentrating on ourselves, much too much concentrating internally, instead of looking what's going on around us in the world. And we did not yet find, and I think you addressed that very nicely, we did not yet find the right equation between economic growth, freedom, democracy, and social welfare and environmental protection. We have not yet found the right equation compared to the global environment.
It's that internal preoccupation, that navel gazing, perhaps born of crises. We have had a pretty tough time of it lately while the rest of the world has been growing around us. And we need to shift that mentality now. Mark, you wanted to come in here.
Yes. So I think, the world needs a strong Europe, and Europe needs a strong Europe. But you always have the default to think small. So I think, and that's what tends to happen here. I think you default to thinking small, nationalism, populism, whatever, right? So, and if you look compared to the rest of the world, the rest of the world is moving at a different speed. So things are happening, economies are growing. I look at the digitization thing. We pat ourselves on the back here when we think about a single digital market in Europe. It's like being in a club of one. It's a global market. And how you think about being more global, I think it is. I think we're too insular here. We don't really care about what's happening around us. And we're going to, the world's going to pass us by. That's what I worry about.
Carolyn?
And I agree with that. And I'd almost take it back. I sometimes think in these conversations that it's useful to go back to the level of an individual company, because it is firms and people who are taking risks in companies, who are taking those decisions around investment or skills or strategy or pace of digitization. And just one observation I think I'd had from the UK environment. We've done some work comparing productivity by sector and productivity by firm. And it's absolutely fascinating. You go back to basics. And the sectors where we have had most global competition, been most open to international investment, they are our highest productivity sectors. And it's no coincidence. So if I look at the UK automotive industry 25, 30 years ago, it had died. It had died. And by opening it up to international investment, a lot of it from other countries in Europe, we now have, in the UK, the most productive automotive plants anywhere in the world. And so there is something really profound, I think, here about openness to competition at the firm level, and people make decisions within those environments, and getting back to that kind of basic of what means, what it takes to have good investment decisions. Competition, openness to other markets, I think is crucial.
Thank you. And you wanted to come, and then Ulrich, I'd like to come back to your point about where the growth is coming from. But Anne first.
Well, as sort of the only policy voice on the panel, I would just ask, because for many years we were told about the enormous growth and the BRICS, and but they're not doing so well these days. So I mean, if you say there's a high degree of navel gazing, which I don't necessarily disagree with, but I mean, if I look around in the world, whether it's in China, where millions of people are going to be laid off from so-called zombie companies now, Brazil, I mean, where is it working that much better? I mean, we are in very, very difficult times, and I would say, on balance, Europe is at least holding up. So, I mean, I would just really ask, where is it working that much better?
Thank you, because
in a democratic system, okay? So don't come and talk about places where I know, there's no democracy. The other thing I want to raise on digitalization and the DSM, absolutely true. But one concern that I have is actually about the technology adoption in companies, because I actually think one of the problems in Europe is that many companies have been very slow to embrace and adopt digital technologies and understanding the profound change that it brings about. So if you look at the figures, only about 1.7% of European companies are really, really using all available digital technologies. Only about 14% of companies use the internet to sell. So, I mean, I think the DSM is one thing, but the DSM really can't work unless we have companies that really embrace digital and make it part and parcel of what they do. So I'm not talking about technology companies. I'm talking about traditional companies and traditional sectors that really need to embrace this. And unless we do that, it's very difficult for me to see how European companies can be really at the leading edge of the global economy. So I think it's a two-way street here. We're trying to deliver on the digital single market, but the companies need to really embrace the digital technologies and understand the profound change it brings about. And I think on balance, it's been a little bit slow.
Thank you, and I'm sure we'll come back to that when we talk about conquering competitors, and then when we talk about being big on the big things. That's, for most people, one of the biggest things. I mentioned some of the numbers earlier. But Ulrich, to pick up on Anne's point, and you said 90% of the growth will come from outside the EU. But as Anne is pointing out, my question really is, where is it going to come from in the significant numbers that we need when you look at China, when you look at the Russian economy, partly because of sanctions, but really struggling, when you look at the impact of the Syrian crisis? Where is the growth going to come from? And what are the implications of this period of, not just in Europe where we have some growth but not being matched by job creation, but also everywhere else struggling too? As a businessman, how do you see that environment?
I'm still sure that there will be growth in China. Everybody is crying about China. They might grow by 5% to 6%, but that's still 5 to 6%. Yeah? It's still growth. So I'm not so nervous about China like other people. They are on the way from a quantitative growth to a qualitative sustainable growth. But it could be healthy and could be a lot of chances. I'm still optimistic about North America. Of course, let's see what the election brings, and if Mr. Trump, he will make North America really strong. Yeah? So that's new chances for us. Of course, he's against TTIP, like everybody in the election right now. So let's see how we can take part on this growth, but still North America's growth. South America, of course, it's a problem, it's a challenge. Russia, all the oil exporting countries, of course, are very difficult because we should not forget the low oil prices help us a little bit, but on the other side, they will harm our export sales. So it will be difficult, but there is no real growth story in Europe so far. So let's see. If we can grow faster, the better. And we should not forget, everybody is crying about the refugee crisis. If we are successful in integrating them time by time, it takes a long time. It takes, of course, a long time for Germany, for all the other countries. If we are successful, that could be also a growth factor. We have a lot of countries, we have a demographic problem in Germany, but also in other European countries. So if we are successful, if we are solidary in Europe, if we take this European challenge, that could also be a growth factor. So a lot of chances, so that's the reason why I'm optimistic, but I would come back to your remark, and I like that because, as president of the German industry, I make speech about digitalization, about Internet 4.0 and all this stuff. And I went to Silicon Valley, and it's great. It's a growth story. It's a fantastic story. But I was wondering, as an entrepreneur on the other side, I'm CEO of a medium-sized family company, metal processing, sulfur chemicals, 172 years old, very old business, old economy. What's all this about my business? Yeah, you're talking about everywhere in the world, yeah, but what is with my business? And it's really a challenge. What to do? What does that affect my business? And now in Silicon Valley, I met some Cisco people, and we're making our workshop at our company just to give ideas, make sure with our people and their people where could Internet 4.0 digitalization affect our business. And that's a real challenge. And there's a lot of uncertainty in the European economy, especially in the small and medium-sized companies like GE or Siemens or so. Probably not the problem, that's a bigger chance, and they have a lot of people to think about it. But that's a real challenge, but also a real chance. Because, and then I'm sorry, I'm quiet, but during my visits to Silicon Valley, everybody is saying, are we losing the race in Europe and Germany? We will lose, and they are so fast, and they're so big, and they have Facebook and Microsoft and all this stuff, Google, yeah? We will not lose the face. In industry, in the B2B business, yeah, we have so much chances if we are fast and if we build also on a European single market. So I'm quite optimistic in this stuff, but we shouldn't sleep. We should be more dynamic, become more dynamic and faster.
As you say, the word coming through from all of you at the time is speed, agility. We need to move much further. But on this question, and then I will come out to all of you, and if someone could perhaps bring me another handheld microphone, because I'm going to leave mine with Mark. Where is the growth for you as companies? Where do you see the growth? And interestingly, from what Ulrich is saying, it does mean we need to focus much more on generating our own growth, because the rest of the world is not doing as well. It's not going to be the land of milk and honey, and all we need to do is fix our trade deals, etc., and we're there. But where do you see it coming from? How do you see this growth landscape? Mark, a thought from you as an American in Paris, if I can describe you as
I'm
such.
English, but I work for a global company, which happens to be headquartered in America. I agree with Anna and Ulrich, actually, because I think the digital, is going to be a huge growth area but I think a lot of companies, I talk to a lot of customers, they don't know what to do. And I think and part of that is that there's no ecosystem. And so really where Europe has got to focus on is really helping kind of generate that ecosystem. I think actually, to be honest, I was down in Mobile World last week in Barcelona, and I was actually looking around for just to see what the countries were doing. Actually, France, of all places, was doing a pretty good job actually of promoting, how they're going to create an ecosystem. And so you've got to do that because, a small company, it's overwhelmed with like, what do I do? And actually, if they're part of an ecosystem, they can understand what they're really, 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 really good at, and that's what they focus on the digital side. So I think, we're looking at how we partner up with lots of different companies, making a system which is open for everybody, and we think that's going to be an enormous growth area. I just come back also to Anne on the globe. I was based in China for 5 years, right? And I agree with Ulrich, 6% is still a pretty good figure, right? If you're on the ground of these countries, and you're actually doing business, it's very much in different sectors. So you can't kind of generalize, and you shouldn't really read in the papers at all, actually, because on the ground, there is still growth. If you actually live and breathe in China, it's a pit stop, right? So they in the longer term, these economies are going to grow. And so, we as companies need to make sure we're ready to position ourselves for that growth. So I think this is a pit stop.
Thank you, and I am informed that your mic may actually work now, but we'll see in a moment when you... sounds like it did. Speak to me. Yeah, sounds like it's working now, but we'll keep that just in case. Juan, where do you see the growth coming from, and what implications does that have for us?
The growth, the average growth of the world this year will be 3%. In Europe, half of this 3%. And in China and India, it will be minimum more than 6%. Then it's very clear where is the population. The population is located in China and India. And the growth will come from these countries. And then from the European companies' point of view, where we have the possibilities in the future, not in our domestic market, of course, outside. Let me give you one number of the Spanish economy. During the last 10 years, we increased by 2 the exports in euros and in number of companies, and especially in Latin America. This is an opportunity for us, but of course in Europe we have very close Africa, and Africa will be a big opportunity in the next years.
Absolutely, thank you. Any other thoughts on this question of this changing growth pattern, this slowing down, and what it means for us before I go out to the room? Anne, did you raise the point? Want to come back on it?
Well, I think one thing to be clear from a policy-making side, yes, if China has 5-6% growth, I'm sure it offers many opportunities for companies. But it's not exactly an inspiration for us here in Europe. We don't want to live like the Chinese do with pollution and a lack of democracy. The same on Africa. I know that in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, there are going to be high growth rates, but doing a fair amount of foresight, I mean, the projection is that even though there will be high growth, it will not really be enough to substantially lift the living standards of people. So we are actually expecting new wave of refugees coming from sub-Saharan Africa, you know. So growth, yes, and I would be the last person to deny the importance of growth, but there's more to it from at least the policymakers' point of view.
Georg, you wanted to come in.
Well, first, I think on a long-term basis, we need to figure out whether we are able to deal without growth. That's on a very long-term basis. Growth, I think it's not that much about the absolute growth in the entire world, but it's about which stake Europe could take out of the growth. And it's about the quality of growth. And it's how we organize our external economic policy and how we address growth areas in the world. So we can't, and I fully agree with you, we can't compare ourselves with China. And because there are completely different legal frameworks, different social measures, different financial situations, different environment. And that brings me to the point which was not addressed in any way. It's about China itself and how we deal with China and how we deal with China's protective procedures and how we deal with dumping measures. And I think that's what we should address, because what we, on the other hand, I think are overestimating is our European potential in and opportunities in China.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I do want to come to that point about China's bid for market economy status. What should the approach be? No, not at all. Extremely important to raise it. We'll talk. I'm going to go out to the audience in a moment, then I want to come back and talk about trade generally. TTIP's already been mentioned. This question of China, what do we do? But Carolyn, did you have on that, or if it's on that, can we park it just for a moment? Or was it something else?
It's still on China. But if you've done enough on China,
No, I'd like to come back to China and do lots more. It's just I want to do it in the context of our trade relations. So let me just come out into the room and see if anybody wants to pose a question or indeed make a comment. The only thing I ask, whichever option you're choosing, is that you are brief so we can get lots in, and please introduce yourself. Thank you, madam.
I'm Sarah Gordon. I'm the business editor at the Financial Times. I'll come around maybe so you can see me a bit better.
That's great.
I'd like to ask all the panel what they will do in the event of a Brexit, a vote by the UK to leave the EU. As business lobbyists and the heads of important European companies, will you lobby your governments, your national governments, to reinstate the sort of free trade arrangements that we have now? Will you see Brexit as an opportunity as much as a negative? And what actions will you take in the immediate aftermath and the long term? Thank you.
Okay, let me see. Are there other questions or indeed, as I say, comments to what you've heard? I see one right at the back end. And excuse me, I'm going to have to... Sorry about that, my dear. Thank you very much. And if you could pass the mic down, we'll do a bit of... Emma said we all have to work together to be stronger. We're going to have to work together to get the mic to everyone. Please.
Good morning. Andreas Galanakis with American Chamber of Commerce. I'm Chamber U. Could you comment on the importance of the single market to actually help Europe become much more competitive and achieve growth? There seems to be much more to do in achieving that single market. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And an issue we will also discuss in our next panel as well. Any others while I am out here for now? I see one right over to the other side. Where are you? Sorry, can you wave at me again? I saw a hand and then I lost it. There we are. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Jörg Tetzlaff, German Insurance Association. So to the panel. If you say the presidential candidates are against TTIP at the moment, so if we can't come to an agreement in the end, what would it mean for Europe, for the European Union, if the trade agreements, are set up by other regions
Okay.
than in future.
Thank you very much indeed. So if it fails these negotiations, what will the implications be? Any last one before I come back? I'll give you another chance before we finish, but very specific question related to Brexit. So let's deal with that. Deal with the single market, as I say, very much a topic as well for our next panel. And then if I can broaden that TTIP question, I'd like to talk about the EU's trade strategy overall as well, and the China, come back to the China question. So Brexit, I'll ask you at the end to react, Carolyn, but what does it mean for all of you? What would happen if on June 24th we find out that the UK is leaving? Who would like to come in? Mark first, yeah, and then Georg.
I think you look, as a business person, you have to, now in the world, you have to deal with volatility every day. So who could have imagined the Arab Spring? Who could have, seen the oil price at $30? Who could have imagined the UK leaving Europe, right? So I think from the way you deal with it when it happens. And as a global company, you shift your resources around accordingly. Now, personally, as a Brit, I think it's a horrible thought. And it just makes Europe smaller, and it makes the UK smaller. And I can't imagine why that's a good thing for anybody, actually. So I think we'll deal with it from a commercial perspective as we do it. And we've come out and we signed a petition which was publicized this week, actually, on supporting the UK staying in, because we just think it's a bigger Europe. UK's got to be part of that, and we think that's so important.
But in answer to the specifics about what happens if they don't, you'd rather cross that bridge when you get to it.
Yeah, you deal with when it happens.
Georg and then Juan.
Well, I think it's more of a political issue than of an economic issue. I think the European Union will always find a way to deal economically with the UK. But I think this is something appearing on the horizon which could have a huge impact on the entire political situation in Europe, because the British population is not the only one. It's not the only one opposing the basic European idea. So that's the bigger threat than the economic perspective, I'd guess.
But if, as you're implying, Georg, that led to an unraveling, so others begin to get the same idea, then the economic impact would be profound, surely.
Certainly. Consequently, yes.
But you think it's politics first?
It's politics first.
Okay. Juan, you want to come in then, Ulrich?
Yes, I think there are things very clear. One thing is the politics. Politics is always, everything is possible. And another thing is the numbers. With the numbers, but one problem. We have to explain carefully, not for tomorrow, forever, the numbers, what we can do, what is possible, what is not possible, and evaluate a simulation of if we decide 1, the answer will be 2. If we decide 2, the answer will be 3. And this is step by step, but with time, we have to explain everybody the numbers.
Okay, thank you. Ulrich.
I think one has to differentiate between politics and companies. Politics, and I would like to quote Ms. Merkel, who last Sunday said she does not have a plan B for the refugee crisis. She's fighting for plan A. And I think for politics also, we don't have a plan B. We are fighting for plan A to keep to avoid the Brexit. In companies, in global companies who have activities in England everywhere, they should make plans B, like banks, like companies like you, to be reactive. But I think for politics, I don't know. I'm not sure if there are already plan Bs.
Okay. Carolyn, from your perspective, I mean, obviously you can't talk about what you would do in the event of it, but can I ask you a slightly different question? Because react to what they have said,
Sure.
but also you talked about, you're very grateful for the support and the help you're getting. There has been this letter, which is signed by a number of companies, but where do you think business intervention in this debate is helpful, and where might it be less than helpful? Do you have any notes of caution for people in this room who really want to help in that fight? Is there anything they shouldn't do as well as what they might be able to do?
So I think three things on that. I think the first thing is where it has, I think, already been very helpful is in terms of really putting competitiveness firmly at the heart of the next era of Europe. I think that's something which businesses have been very concerned about in the UK in terms of regulation, in terms of completion of the single market, and just the voice that has come out, I think, both in the renegotiations but also from businesses and business organisations across Europe. Competitiveness doesn't just matter to the UK, it matters across Europe, and that has come out very strongly, and that's an area of real help and real support, and I think that could continue. I think that the second area of help and support is we have a lot of European businesses operating in the UK, and they are employing many people, and they are making significant investment choices in the UK. And actually those voices are really important because I think what's very clear, and I've spoken to a lot of companies myself, the capital is mobile. Those decisions are mobile. And the attractiveness of the UK in the future, I think, is something that if European businesses were to speak up about that, and to be absolutely honest, the more positive that case can be, the better. It's about the attractiveness of the UK as a destination for investment, as being part of Europe, that I think is very helpful.
So if there's something to avoid, it is trying to do it through fear.
I think that there is. I think that it has to be a balanced picture. I have to say the one final thing is that I think we would love to hear the voices of smaller businesses. I mean, there's no doubt that the voice of major businesses is really important. Huge impact on jobs, huge impact on growth. But actually, some of the scale-up businesses that some of which were born global, that really benefit. They don't even think twice about the fact that they can immediately sell on the internet across Europe. These are very important voices as well, and we would love to hear from them.
Thank you. And that's very important because, as you say, when we're talking about the global outlook, you might think, why are we talking Brexit? But it is precisely to frame this discussion about our future, I say our country I know best as well, in the context of that global outlook and I think Federica Mogherini's expression about it's just relative scales of small in a globalized world. But let's come to the TTIP question specifically. But if I, in the interest of time, could broaden it, and we do have a new EU trade strategy. And my question to you, consequences of failure in TTIP, but also more broadly, do you think the EU's trade strategy is currently on the right track, that it is focusing on the right things to open up markets for you, to give you new investment opportunities? Or are you concerned that it is not ambitious enough or something? And in that context, how do you see this question of China's bid for market economy status? Who would like to come in first on this one? Please, Georg.
Well, I think basically the procedures of the European Union are fine. So we really, for the first time, see an attempt to change the situation. But that's my personal perspective, and I'm very much interested if you share that. I think TTIP is one issue we really need. But on the other hand, at the same time, we need free trade agreements with Russia, for instance, and we must not impose different perspectives on Russia and on China, for instance. That's what we do. And we don't really deal with them equally. So we impose sanctions on Russia for more or less the same things. We do not impose sanctions on China, just because of economic evaluations. But what we need is a multilateral grid of agreements, because otherwise Europe will be lost. And what we need to do, and our politicians too, should do, and I have to admit that especially the Austrian politicians do that very poorly, they should convince the population that international free trade agreements are to the benefit of the people, and that's what we don't do.
So one key area for you would be to try and revitalize and get the World Trade Organization working again. But this public message, because TTIP, let's face it, in Europe is not going down tremendously well, and that's probably an understatement. But Anne, you wanted to come in. And then Mark.
Yes, on the broader issue of trade, because this is, of course, something that we spend a lot of time thinking about, because, as was already mentioned, 90% of the growth will come from outside of Europe. So it's very important to pay attention to that. And I note in passing now that Germany exports more to the United States than to France. So things are changing in very profound ways. But just to say, on the side of the European Commission, we are currently negotiating 27 free trade agreements. You know that we made big progress just a few days ago on CETA, which we are negotiating with Canada, where big progress was made around investor protection. And just yesterday I had a conversation where we said this is a progressive government. We really see eye to eye with the Canadians. And it is precisely this element of showing that trade benefits, frankly speaking, not just big companies, but society at large, is really important. So the new trade strategy has a very, very important focus on sustainability, on SMEs, etc. So I really think it's a way forward, and it's something that we are keenly aware of. The other thing I want to mention is one of our new initiatives is on economic diplomacy, and it is really combining better our foreign policy with some of the economic tools that we have. So to have really a much more integrated approach to foreign policy. And because internationally we have many obligations. We signed on to the SDGs in New York last year, the Sustainable Development Goals. We come out of the Paris Climate Conference. So to look at how do we better combine this, you know, foreign policy, trade, foreign aid, etc., I think is another thing that we can do at the European level.
Thank you, and an interesting point, because business sometimes feel trade policy is being used to meet other objectives, and one argument I know Business Europe has made is we need to be at the forefront of this, because in the end trade is about opening up markets, those investment opportunities. How do you get that balance? But Mark, you wanted to come in, and the consequences if TTIP, more broadly, but also the consequences if TTIP fails.
Well, you know, we believe in free trade, period, right? So the more free trade is available, the more it stimulates, you know, jobs, right? Because I think the debate you hear is, oh, it's, you know, we don't like TTIP. But I don't think the connection's made between trade, export, and jobs. And we went through this recently in the United States with the discussion around US Exim. Okay, so same thing, oh, it's corporate welfare, right? So we kind of told the basically the United States, it's fine, okay, we just go do elsewhere. So they were saying, fine. But then we started moving factories out of Texas and Pennsylvania to Europe and Canada. So, whoa, what's happening? So, no. Exports means jobs, right? So if we need to do them somewhere else, you've got to move the jobs elsewhere. So I think that connection with jobs is important. And so if TTIP doesn't happen, I think that's bad for jobs in Europe, period, okay? China, just as because I think it's a similar issue here. China, my view is, look, Europe should not be scared of China at all. We bought Alstom to do work outside of Europe, and we mostly partner with China. China needs Europe as a partner, and I think that's the approach you take. It's the same as our approach in China. The biggest risk of China is not being there, because it's such a massive market, such a huge opportunity. So all the discussion we hear is around, you know, we see it's about protectionism, it's about competition. At the end of the day, competition is good for everybody, because if you have competition, you innovate. And the more you innovate, the better it is for the world, right? So you know, we believe free trade is important, TTIP is critical, China, you know, Europe should not be scared of.
Okay. Ulrich, you wanted to come in and Juan.
I just wanted to say, okay, he's right, but competition is important, but fair competition. I think that's the point, fair competition. And especially in the steel industry and some other field, we don't see fair competition, so we have to react. Never mind what's about the market economy status. If it comes or if it goes, probably somebody has to decide it, but we need fair competition and we need instruments. If we have a market economy status for China, still we need instruments to look after fair competition. That's one point. The other point is you asked about the trade strategy of the European Commission. I think it's very good, it's excellent, and we are doing a lot, and everything is fine. It's not fine, but we are on the right track, and hopefully we will get some successes. The question is, will the national parliaments, the national debates, will they follow this strategy? Especially in Germany, you have really a challenge there. Nobody understands it because especially Germany lives from global trade. We are fighting on it. I think we get the discussion more and more rational, more and more fact-orientated, but that's a real challenge. And also, if I may say so, the actual Commission, Ms. Malmström, at this point, she does a very good job because she has a sensitivity for transparency, yeah, and that's for getting trust to people. I think it's all in life trust, and I think that's very important. And if we are successful to get trust in the national debates, yeah, then we will be successful, and then we will have some successes.
We need to create the right atmosphere to enable this to happen. Juan, and I know you want to come back on China, so.
Well, I think there is no alternative international trade than fair trade. Fair trade is very important. There are a lot of people saying no to the international trade. Well, okay, what is the alternative? Autarky? We have to see what is the population, where we have the unemployment around the world. We have more than the official numbers are more than 200 people around the world with no employment, and then we have to see with the evolution where we can invest in order to accelerate new jobs in these countries. But free trade, international free trade, we have no alternative.
Carolyn, TTIP, a central plank, indeed, of David Cameron's campaigning strategy on Brexit, saying these are the sorts of deals we need, and we get them if we stay in Europe. So the what if it fails, hopefully that wouldn't happen this side of a vote if it did happen at all, but how do you see the broader picture of the EU's trade strategy? And you did want to come back on the China question.
No, I did. I mean, I think that these are very important times for leadership in trade because it's been true through history that when you see times of global downturn, you tend to see the return of protectionism and the kind of sense that these are zero-sum games. And this narrative, which I think is incredibly important, which I think David Cameron has been trying to make clear, these are not zero-sum games. This is the way you create growth and jobs. And some of the numbers being put around TTIP, you know, the £10 billion opportunity, we need to keep those really high on the agenda. And I think the link with the debate on the European referendum is important. I mean, I think the US and the trade representative, Mark Froman, has made clear that actually the willingness of the US to deal separately with the UK outside TTIP is not going to be very great. So I think these are important discussions. I would just add on China. I think that there is such an important period of growth that China is going to go through, which is about urbanization, and the fact that we will be in a situation within 10 years that 200 of the 600 most affluent global cities are going to be Chinese. And that opportunity for the kinds of economies that we have to export to them has never been greater. And so that kind of understanding again of the collective benefit of trade with China. Yes, we have the fairness issues, very, very important, but the opportunity is extraordinary.
Thank you very much. And I want to come back. We're talking about public opinion there in relation to trade and to TTIP. Also, come back to the migration and refugee crisis, because Ulrich made a very interesting point about the long-term impact, but obviously public opinion here for reflecting a lot of these sentiments that are making it such a challenging environment for Europe. But let's see if there are any other... Yes? Sorry? Georg, yeah.
Comment on the economic trade policy of the European Union, which we basically agree, but and appreciate, but it is unfortunately sometimes accompanied by counterproductive measures. And let me just raise one example. One example is the supply chain due diligence. This is a bureaucratic burden you can't imagine. And we have to follow that, and other regions in the world don't even care. So that imposes additional costs and additional restraints on us. This is just one example. So the best foreign economic policy doesn't help if it's not supported by internal measures.
That joined up thinking between the external and the internal. I saw a hand somewhere here. Yes, please.
Hello, thank you. Andrés Barceló, Director General at UNESID, the Spanish Steel Association. I would like just to remark, we are in favor of free trade, but we need fair trade. We cannot avoid that, because otherwise Europe cannot be a naive environment just hoping that other companies subsidized by the other governments are flooding our market and destroying our jobs. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So very much they're echoing Ulrich's point from earlier. Maria João Rodriguez, we'll hear from you this afternoon, but welcome, please.
Very well. So I'm coming with a very precise question, starting with the statement of our president, which is about the future of Schengen and the challenges we are confronted with. And in my case, as a vice president in the European Parliament, we had a very good discussion with President Tusk and President Juncker about a very simple idea, which is investing in Schengen. Because I believe that if you want Schengen really to survive on the long term, we need, first of all, to make sure that we have a real European border, and this is a big undertaking, a big investment. Second, we need also to invest in our neighbor countries to stabilize neighborhood of Europeans. And thirdly, we need also to invest internally in the Schengen area. So my question for you is, what can business community do in order to invest in Schengen? Because this is indeed a major asset of European integration.
Thank you very much. I'll take one more before I come back. Eric Jonat from ASEA.
I'm representing the European automotive industry. One of the insights we see, at least in the automotive industry, that Europe is one of the most regulated economies, especially comparing with other markets globally. So the question is, how do you see the role of regulation when it comes to, improving our competitiveness in Europe? Don't we need more regulatory reform in order to perform? And then more particularly, more simplification of regulation, reduce the complexity and the red tape in order to make Europe more competitive globally.
Thank you very much. And that competitiveness issue and the role of regulation very much going to feature in our next panel. But do pick up on those points if you want. But the question that Maria João Rodriguez raised there, linking more broadly, obviously, to the migration and refugee crisis. And we talked about the implications for the world if we fail on TTIP, the implications if we can't find a common solution on this one from a business perspective could be enormous. So a thought on that, if you would. How do we, does she have an idea then? Change the debate into one about investing rather than the current negative debate. Ulrich first.
Yes, of course, we have to invest in Schengen, and we have a lot of investment programs, but the most important thing, but you mentioned it, we have also to invest in the countries where the people come from. Yeah, in the refugee stores, it's unbelievable that they come to us not because of wars, but they don't have enough to eat and to drink. Yeah, and that's something that can't be true, and we have to, in the long term, we have to develop programs. Of course, we need a ceasefire in Syria, for example. We need freedom there, but afterwards, hopefully it comes. Then we need programs to invest there, to make these, to rebuild these, to restore these countries, to help the people to locate at their home. They don't want to necessarily come to Germany, to Europe. They want to survive. If they can survive, if they can live in their homes. So we have to invest there, and that will cost a lot of money to prevent them, to help them. And we should not forget, we're talking about now, I don't know, 60 million, 30 million being somewhere in movement in the world. Via internet, via the transparent world, everybody realizes where are the rich countries with a lot of welfare, Europe, Germany, all the other countries here, and where the poor countries. It's very transparent. Everybody has a mobile phone. Everybody is connected to the internet. So they will realize very fast where are the good places, the bad places. So that will cause in the future, next 5 to 10 years, huge amounts of people moving from one point to another. And we have to find a solution for that. Solution is to invest there more, to make these countries, Africa will be a real huge problem. Yeah? So we have to invest more in Africa, not only the Chinese people.
And Carolyn, Donald Tusk making the point in his video about the potential impact on the debate and the battle you're just fighting. How do you see the threat to Schengen, to the European Union. People saying this is even more fundamental than that. If Schengen begins to go, then the single market begins to go, and we are in real trouble. How do you see this?
I think people in the UK care hugely about this. Clearly, we are protected by directly. We are an island, but nonetheless, it is a huge issue in the UK. And I think that this is an example of where actually the European Union pulling together, developing a strategy, being seen to collaborate, will actually be a very powerful thing. And the more there can be of that around Schengen, around support in the origin countries, I think it is going to be an important issue in the referendum.
And we've talked quite a lot about public opinion in lots of different contexts, but one thing I'm wondering, is it helpful? There have been some attempts to put some numbers on what putting the borders back will mean. They vary enormously. The French did some work in this area. We've seen other numbers. Does that help? Or sometimes is there a risk it looks as if we're just throwing up numbers? Is that part of the argument for why that will help to keep Europe together on this? Or do you think there's something much more fundamental ahead?
No, I think it's always good to try to put numbers and evidence. And I think some of the discrepancy that you describe in the numbers comes from different things were measured. So for instance, when we did the exercise, we only looked at the borders that are currently closed, yeah? Others extrapolated, what if all the borders are closed? So I mean, that explains to some extent the discrepancy in the numbers. But just to say, I really liked Maria João Rodriguez's point on the investment, because I think it's very valid. So we have looked a little bit what other countries spend on protecting their external borders. And to give you an example, United States spends $30 billion a year. Just protecting the Mexican-American border, $13 billion. So I think we will need a lot of investment. So I think some of this is in the pipeline, as well as other initiatives such as the Border and Coast Guard, European Border and Coast Guard, which hopefully leaders will conclude or decide on in June. But the point that I'm making is we really, really need to operationalize this now. We need to look at this, and as well as the investment in the neighborhood. So to give you an example, I already spoke about economic diplomacy, but did you know that the European Investment Bank can only invest 10% of its capital outside of the EU? Does that make sense? You know, if 90% of the growth is outside of the EU, and we know that we have a very, very fragile neighborhood. So I think we need to look at these kind of issues, because it's really hit home now that if we have so much instability around us, it can destabilize ourselves. So,
yeah. Thank you. Georg, you wanted to come in?
Well, I'm convinced that if we question, harm, or abandon one of the 4 basic freedoms of the European Union, we question the entire European Union. This must not happen. Therefore, we must not in any way reinforce borders within the European Union. But I'm completely in line that we have to invest in our external, in saving and securing our external borders. And it's ridiculous if we ask Greece to secure their borders. They are not even able to do that without support of the entire European Union. And on the other hand, I think it's very much naive if we think that Turkey will be the solution. I don't believe that. And I think each cent and each billion we invest in Turkey is lost. So I think we need to do it on our own, but we have to do it in a common and joint way, and not leave the problem to just a handful of countries. And one or the other country, like my country, is not reacting in a proper way now. Okay? So
I know where your passion for this subject is coming from. Any last thoughts on that before we draw some conclusions? Juan?
No, I think Schengen is a big achievement for Europe, very, very important. But one thing is 10 years or 12 years ago, with no problems outside the borders of Europe. Another thing is that with the crisis outside Europe, in the borders of Europe. Let me give you an example in Spain. In the beginning of this century, we need more workers because the booming of the construction. Foreign people, or how many million of foreign people arrived to Spain during 2000, 2009? 6 million. 4.5 legal and 1.5 illegal. And we destroy more than 4 million jobs during the crisis. And now, with these people inside Spain, we are able to create just only 500,000 jobs a year. But we will need probably 4, 5, 6 years in order to stabilize the situation. This is an example. This is what did happen in Spain during the last years. What we have to see, it will happen in the rest of Europe now.
So I come back to the comment on free trade, right? Fair, absolutely, agree, right? But you have at the world table, you need a strong Europe, and I think it's the same because a weak, fragmented Europe, it just is not going to have the right voice. And I think I look at the immigration crisis. I'm no expert, but that's what Europe was put on the earth for, right? To solve that. And again, if they don't, then the countries themselves are going to figure out they need to do it themselves, and it's going to be fragmented again. So I think a strong Europe is key. The question on regulation as well. I think Europe can play a huge role in smart regulation. So I look at, for example, the targets on renewables. That drives growth. I look at the discussion on a north-south corridor for gas. That drives growth. I think smart regulation is important and can drive growth within the Schengen region.
Thank you, and we will, as I say, come back to that issue in our next panel, but we are nearly out of time, and I want to try and put you all a little bit on the spot here in terms of priorities, because politicians are very fond of saying, okay, what do you want me to do? What's the one thing you want me to do to help you out? So among all these challenges that we've talked about, challenges, opportunities, if for each of you there was one priority, or if you can't identify it as there's only one thing we need to do, if I can put it slightly different way, one key next step, one thing, if we went out of here today and did one thing to really make a difference in terms of meeting these challenges, making the most of the opportunities, and enable in business to have that supportive environment that Emma started with, what for each of you is that one thing? And I started at this end with my first question, so I'm going to start at that end with my last one. Juan first.
Well, I think Brussels and all our countries legislate without having in mind the cost for the companies of the legislation. In Europe, today at European level, the legislation enforces around 20,000 legislative acts. In Spain, for example, this year, we produced around 1,000 new laws. And in our gazettes, we produce more than 1 million pages. And I think it's too expensive. And we have to think of small regulation, better regulation. But one thing very, very important, we have to know exactly, in relation with the companies, how much it costs in terms of GDP, the regulation. I remember an Italian study 10 years ago, 12 years ago, saying that between 1.5 to 3 points of GDP. We have to study, we have to see, we have to compare, and we have to compare inside Europe and outside Europe.
Okay. Thank you very much. Georg.
I don't know if I have the correct number in mind, but I think it's 124 billion euros that are imposed by overregulation. That's the number I have in mind, but I'm not quite sure if it's correct. It's all about growth. Is all about economic freedom, and what I would do is to abandon 50% of the European regulation and legislation. That would make things much easier, and I'd combine with this because lots of these regulations are very much driven by consumer protection, and I think we overload consumer protection.
Okay, we'll come back to that, I am sure, in our next session. Mark, your one key next step or priority?
So, I think about Europe, always think about competitiveness, and particularly the labour markets, right? But I think as looking forward, our view is this digital transformation is huge, and that Europe can play a very, very key role in the world. But if you don't have the ecosystem developed, it's not going to happen, and the world's going to bypass Europe. So I think, you know, the one ask would be, you know, focus on the future, focus on digital. How do we kind of create ecosystems in Europe?
Okay, thank you very much, and I will ask that to our next panel. Ulrich.
So it's very easy. Fight for a better, meaning stable, competitive, efficient, solidaric Europe. Europe is a solution, Europe is not the problem.
Okay, thank you very much. Carolyn.
If I had to pick one thing out of everything we've talked about that I think is really going to be the most important, I think it's about skills, innovation, and people. And so I would go through everything that relates to that, from our education systems to the regulations surrounding how you employ people and who you employ, and work out how we make that as adapted as we possibly can to enable our companies to be agile and invest in the people we need for the future.
Thank you very much. Anne, you have the last word.
No, thank you so much. So I'll go back to something I already mentioned, which is digitalization and technology adoption. Because I think unless companies really embrace this, we're going to be in big trouble. And one of the things that I've been looking at is how can we incentivize it? So we've done so much on the policy side to incentivize R&D investment. Hugely. We've given tax breaks. We've had national targets. We've had European targets. It's been part and parcel of economic development agendas, whether it's the Lisbon Agenda or Europe 2020. We have not had a similar effort on technology adoption. And I think that, you know, perhaps looking at incentivizing companies to do that, because right now you invest in ICT, it's just an expense in your spreadsheet. So I think that, you know, looking at how can we incentivize this in very, very clever ways, because we already spoke about Germany, but this is a big issue also for German companies. And I saw a speech that Chancellor Merkel gave where she talked about the digital anxiety in companies, for instance, in adopting cloud computing. This is a real, real big issue. So I think on the policy side, how can we incentivize it so that companies do a better job of picking this up?
And answering that question Ulrich said about what do I do and how do I do it and what's in it for me? A very pressing question. We love to talk about Industry 4.0, how to help you all make it happen, and that ecosystem more broadly for the innovation that we need. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in thanking our panel for such an invigorating start to our discussion. We're going to take a coffee break now. Coffee served outside. I should mention, we're going to hear from a rather special European startup in the next session, and if you want to see what they do, over in that corner is a 3D printer in action, so you can see how it works. I think it's one of the miracles, and I realize my age when I think how extraordinary it is what a 3D printer can do. We'll hear from them later. We're going to take a break until 11:30, and then I will see you back here for that next session. But thank you to you, and thank you to all of you for now.